Hey guys, what's going on? James here, and in this video today, I have a very special guest joining me, defensive lineman for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Mr. Adam Gotsis. Adam, how you doing today, man?
Doing good, man. Doing good down here in Tampa, enjoying OTAs. So, yeah, no complaints.
So OTAs have officially started, right? You guys are in phase two of everything right now?
Yep. Yeah, yeah. So just been on the field the last couple week and a bit now, and getting used to having the coaches out there and going through some of the plays and building that camaraderie and all that. So, yeah, it's awesome.
Right on. So, and we'll talk about this, but obviously this has been your first full off season with the team. Okay,
Yeah,
so this is the most. Would you say this is the most long term exposure you've had with the team so far to this point?
yeah, definitely, definitely. I know. Last year I think they I signed like on the Wednesday before the playoff game. So, I was only down there for about 4 or 5 days, but it was awesome just to get in the building, meet some of the guys, and then to come back this year and already have that kind of relationship with some guys in the training room. To the coaching stuff, not many changes there. Obviously we changed D-line coach, but some familiar faces. I know, Charlie Strong and Mike Caldwell, they're in Jacksonville with me. So to see them, it's nice to see some, familiar faces and as well as the playing group.
For sure. So we will talk about those guys in a little bit,
Yeah.
okay? But to start here, I want to go back all the way to the very beginning, okay?
Yeah.
So for everybody watching, Adam, and I believe you still hold this distinction. You were the highest drafted Australian player in NFL history. Did you know that?
I did know that. But yeah, I wasn't sure if, recent years any Aussies have snuck it away from me. But something I'm very proud of and I work very hard for. And, just try to pave the way for other Aussies that are coming through the college ranks and are thinking about coming across to the States and giving it a shot.
So you were born in Melbourne, Victoria, and you
Yep.
grew up playing Australian rules football.
Yeah.
What is that for everybody watching? What is different between that and American football? Just because I know when I was looking it up, and
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to ask you about it. Seems like pretty different overall. So
Oh,
why?
100%.
So
Yeah, 100%. So I grew up playing Aussie rules football, which is basically it's a lot of punting, a lot of running. 18 guys on each team are on the field at the same time. The field's about, I want to say about 250 yards long and about 150 yards wide. So it's a big oval. And I kind of look at it like in soccer, you've kind of got your forwards, your defense, your midfielders, and kind of that structure. But it's full contact tackling. There's a lot of hand-eye coordination, a lot of things like that help me, make that transition even to American football. A lot of being able to tackle guys without pads and get them on the ground and stuff like that. So um, it's definitely helped me in my transition. That was one big thing was coming to playing American football, which I did play in Australia too, but it's more of just like a rec league type sport there.
right.
It's almost like if you were to find like a rugby team here in the States, kind of just local, joining a club, you might have, 20 odd dudes down there that are, you know, they love the sport. And that's kind of what it is back in Australia. It's, you probably got 30 guys down there that are playing American football and, they're just fans of the sport. And it's kind of open age where, you got 18 and up. So you might have like a 40-year-old next to you and, just people that love the sport, passionate about it. So that's kind of my intro into American football and where it all started was just playing on the fields there.
So there's no pads in Australian football.
Yeah, no pads. Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
just
so that's
just wearing a jersey.
it. Sounds like a mix of like rugby and American football in
Yeah,
regards.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
okay. Now I remember there was a point in your life where you were like, at least from the research I had done, where you were
yeah,
like, okay, I'm kind of done with Australian football right now. I want to transition over to American. You've played both extensively now. Which
yeah,
do you like more? I mean, obviously, it's got to be American football, right? Considering you're
yeah,
still
yeah.
doing
No,
it.
no, honestly, I grew up super passionate Australian rules. That's what I wanted to do when I grew up. And that's probably the number one sport in Australia. So as I was kind of playing that, I got to about 15 years old, and I was playing it at a pretty high level. But the game was just changing where they didn't really need like a big guy anymore. It was more like we need like athletic, like big guys that can just run all day, don't need like the big bulkiness and stuff. So I started looking for different, sports and stuff. And I was like, I wanted to give rugby a shot kind of outside of school and trying to find like a local team that I could maybe join and go that route. And literally came across an American football flyer and was like, let me go down and give it a crack. Me and my brother, we'd played a bit of Madden and, I think I'd watched like one college football game at that point. And then, yeah, we saw this flyer and, at the time for the junior competition in Australia, it was like under 14s to under 19s was one age group. So, you'd have 14-year-olds out there with 19-year-olds. And my brother, who was about 4 years older than me, like we both could play on the same team. So, I remember when I first got down there, I didn't even want to get out of the car because I saw like these like 18-year-olds with beards and stuff. And I'm like, I'm not going down there just to get like smashed by these guys. So my brother was like, oh, I'll go down and play with you. So, I got to give a lot of props to him because without him, I probably wouldn't have got out the car that day.
Wow.
And then, so kind of went from that and then, started playing American football, but fell in love with American football just because I felt like there's a spot for everyone. You can be a small, speedy guy. You can be a big guy that, only has to operate in a 5x5 box. You can be a guy that has great hands and can catch. You can be a guy that can't catch, but he's super athletic and, can play defense and can tackle and run and do all that. So, I fell in love with that aspect of it, that there's a position for you. You just got to find the right one. And, luckily, having kind of limited numbers down there, you got to play a few and kind of test it out and see which one fit best. So, I remember I was playing D-line, O-line, I was long snapping, I was, playing running back at times, just doing a bit of everything. And it kind of I fell in love with the game. So, and then, obviously the mental side of the game, the X's and O's, it changes the way you think about sport. It takes it from just athleticism to, okay, now there's like a scheme behind it. There's a reason why we do certain things. There's a reason why we want to show certain defenses and, call certain defenses against offense and vice versa. So just really fell in love with all aspects of the game. And, I still love it to this day. That's some of the big stuff that I do enjoy is, getting into the film room and figuring out what a team does and what do they do well and, what do we do well and how a team's going to try and exploit what we do and, that constant chess match that's happening.
Could we see a coach Adam Gotsis going forward?
I think so at some point. I think, having so much exposure to the game and learning so much about it, like it's just, I want to do justice to the game and what it's given me and, give back to a lot of kids that, need coaching and want good coaching. And, I don't know if it'll be over in Australia or here in the States. I'd love to maybe, link up with like the IMG Academy where they deal with a lot of international guys
Mm-hmm.
and, kind of give my perspective of being an international player that kind of came over and had to do it the kind of long way of playing like in a local comp overseas to then coming to college, what college brings, and then getting to the NFL and, kind of sharing how to stay in the NFL, how to work, how to do all the little things right.
So, one thing I thought was interesting, and you mentioned a little bit, you played an event called the IFAF World Championship, and you got to represent Australia for that competition. Now after that, you went on to sign with Georgia Tech. So you said at that point you'd only watched like one college football game. You hadn't,
Yeah.
and I remember you just mentioned the story. So you saw a flyer promoting Georgia Tech, and that's how you kind of had interest in the school.
Yeah, the interest in Georgia Tech came. So one of my Aussie coaches who was like kind of mentoring me and coaching me, and he coached on the staff at the IFAF World Championships. He had played college football for Hawaii back in like the late '80s, early '90s, and Hawaii used to come to Australia and recruit like rugby players from Australia and stuff like that. And he got recruited to the University of Hawaii, and basically the offensive coordinator at the time was Paul Johnson, who was the head coach of Georgia Tech when I got to Georgia Tech. So I think those two kind of, I don't know if Paul reached out to him. His name's Paul Manera. I don't know if
Hmm.
Paul reached out to him or Coach Johnson reached out to him. I think they were looking for a punter at that point or a kicker. And he's like, well, I got this 6'4", 290-pound guy that can move pretty well, so you might want to check him out. And
Wow.
literally, they just were like, send us some videos of him working out, running, moving, and I remember I just sent him like a kind of a little highlight tape of just me doing offensive line drills, me doing some defensive line drills and stuff. A bit of me just running around, cutting things like that. And yeah, they were like, let's get him over for a visit. So, they bring me out for a visit, and the rest is kind of history.
Because I remember like looking at your draft, or not your draft, but your recruiting profile. I think they had you listed as an offensive tackle on there, on like the official
Yes,
recruiting profile. So like,
probably, probably.
so what made you? How did that? What went into that decision of like playing either offensive line or defensive line?
Yeah, so I'd played offensive line and defensive line, and then when Australia has like a represent national team and stuff, and
Right.
I played in, like the national competition against we played against like Team USA, Mexico, Germany, all those other countries, and I was playing both ways. I was playing tackle, offensive tackle, and defensive line, and I really think I probably not to sound egotistical or anything like that, but I really think I could have probably played either one. I've got long arms and a low base, so I feel like offensive tackle would have been great. But D line, I just felt like that was natural. Just to be getting off the ball, chasing down people, tackling. That's kind of what I grew up doing. So it just felt more natural, that kind of transition. And when I got to Georgia Tech, I feel like they almost recruited me as an athlete. They bring me in, and initially it was the offensive line coach that was kind of recruiting me at the time, and I think they only had 5 returning D linemen coming into that year, so they were like, "Look, we'll start you over at defensive line, and if that doesn't really work out, we'll move you over to offense." And because at that point as well, they're also running the wing T, so they need these offensive linemen that can get to the second level and cut off linebackers, cut off safeties and stuff. So being an athletic guy, I felt like that could be something that I could do too. So I got there, and freshman, I remember I got there like the day before fall camp started in college, and I still remember to this day, first day going through the bags, I tripped over the bags, and I was like, oh no, this can't start any worse. But then, the guys around me, the team, yeah, just felt like home being at that school and with all those guys, and really fell in love with the D line and the group there. And I think I ended up playing like 13 games my freshman year and started one or two. So, after that, it was kind of like, all right, I can do this, I can play. And then, yeah, just kind of, it was just yeah, constant improvement from there. The more I learned about the game, the more I got in the weight room, could catch up to these guys a little bit on that side, on the strength side, and then, you know, um, kind of that raw ability and the conditioning I had from, playing Aussie rules football where you're running, potentially like 10 miles a game. Some guys, I felt like that conditioning just really helped like carry over to football where I could just outlast a lot of guys, and stay at that, even if my 100% was only 80% of a lot of guys. It was like I was given that 100 every single time, and that effort, and running to the ball and making plays that you only make by being around the ball. And that kind of did me well. So yeah, it's been a good journey.
I mean, in today's NFL with Travis Hunter and everything, you could have, hey,
Yeah.
you could have ended up playing both.
Yeah. I think it's a bit different, wide receiver and wide out, because these O linemen don't come off the field. So,
That's
I would have been dead. I would have been dying out there. But
that's yeah. I know you did mention better conditioning, but even
yeah,
that has its
not that.
limits.
Yeah, 100%,
Um,
100%.
so you did go on to Georgia Tech, right? You did some awesome things for them. You had some sacks, some interceptions. You were second team All AAC, team captain. Now you go in the second round of the 2016 draft to the Denver Broncos. Okay, um, based on where you were to where you got, right? Being from Melbourne, Australia, going all the way to a second round pick in the NFL. Um, would you say there was like a chip on your shoulder, a sense of like pride in that? I know you mentioned it earlier, right?
Yeah. I just I just took it day by day. Even through college, it was, I just always worked. And, even going into my senior year, I'd seen a few guys in the years before prior that were on the D line, how they worked and, what it took for them to even just get workouts or to get drafted. So a few of those guys that I just kind of modeled like my work ethic off. And, Georgia Tech's not an easy school, and so I knew I had to take care of the schooling, and then on top of that, it was just get in that weight room, get on the field, run, improve myself, like constantly just if I can get better at one thing every year or two things every year to take my game to the next level, keep doing that, and heading into my senior year, that's what I really focused on and what I did, and then unfortunately, I think in my senior year, I was about week 7 or something like that, week 8, that I tore my ACL. So, I kind of knew like, well, shoot, like the back end of that year is kind of a wash. Let me just get ready for post draft stuff and, get my knee right, do all that stuff. And yeah, just the work ethic. I didn't really, care where I got drafted. If I got drafted, I kind of just said, I just told myself at that point, like, the film's out there, all what I put on the film, that's what the guys are going to watch. If I can present myself in a great way when I went to the combine, do that. But they're going to watch the film. They're going to know what type of guy they're getting, what type of player they're getting. So, I really just took the back seat on that. And I was like, look, if I go undrafted, it's an opportunity. If I go drafted, it's an opportunity. Just treat it like what it is. And, I was very fortunate to get drafted and then, spend a great 4 years in Denver as well. So,
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, and speaking about Denver, by the way, that 2016 defense was insane. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
literally
yeah,
Hall of Famers everywhere.
yeah,
Von Miller was there, T.J. Ward, former Buck,
yeah,
Chris Harris, DeMarcus Ware, Wade Phillips was he the head? He was the
yeah. Wade
DC.
Phillips, DC at that point. Yeah,
Who would you say you learned? One, how was it apart? Because they had just won the Super Bowl the year before.
yeah,
I,
yeah,
I was I was like, dang, he was a year away from playing
yeah.
with Peyton.
I know. Yeah. So that was, when I got that phone call and the Broncos were picking me, I was super excited, and when I went out there, got to meet a lot of the guys, and that first year, I remember, I'm sitting there, and DeMarcus Ware's locker's right next to me, Von Miller's next to him, Derek Wolfe on the other side of the locker room.
Right.
Like you said, the whole no-fly zone over there. Aqib Talib, Chris
Yeah.
Harris, TJ Ward, Bradley Roby, Todd Davis, Brandon Marshall, just so many guys that, are going to be, probably all-time players in the history of
Yeah.
the game. So, just to watch how they worked, how they studied the game, Wade Phillips, who was a great defensive coordinator, and just the scheme and all that stuff. It's such a level up from the college in terms of, really knowing the game and not just relying on like athletic ability. But, if you study the game and you see these little tendencies and breaking down film and, in the film sessions, having like DeMarcus just like pointing out like little keys and tells of offensive linemen and what they're thinking and things like that, it just really like elevates your game to the next level. And, we were a really smart defense. That's the other thing. We had a hell of a bunch of athletes, but, the box was so smart, like the way those guys played. And, we basically knew what every team was doing going into games and, able to expose weaknesses on their side of the ball, help us with the strengths that we do well, creating one-on-one matchups with pass rushes, things like that. And yeah, so just so many guys just to learn from. And, it's hard to pick just one
Yeah.
because each guy kind of bring their own little piece that helps you out. But I think the whole defensive line room at that point was returning from the Super Bowl and just to be around those guys and like I said, watch how they work, watch how they practice. Even like the practice reps, they wanted to have good reps and getting out there, taking care of their bodies, doing all that stuff. It was such an important thing to all of them that it definitely rubs off to everyone else in the room. And they were guys that you could ask questions to and learn the game.
Yeah, because I mean, literally, was it jarring at all? I imagine like we could probably sit here for like 2 or 3 hours, just like the
Yeah,
amount of history. Was it like because you went from again a guy from Australia to being like, holy crap, I'm sitting next to Hall of Famers Von Miller and
Yeah.
DeMarcus Ware, you
No,
know?
no, it definitely was. At certain points, like you're watching the film and you're seeing what these guys are doing, and then you're talking to them just so casually, and then like in the locker room, but then in the film room, you watch how they lock in, how they dissect the game plan, and then you're like, no wonder these guys are great because the time that they're putting into their craft. And even on the practice field, every get off, everything, like what they're thinking, how are they getting ready for their matchup this week, and yeah, I won't say overwhelming because at that point I'm just a sponge and I'm just trying to soak it all in. But
Right.
it's just amazing to be able to share a locker room with those guys and just watch how their careers continued to do great even when I was there. Von had great years, career years, and I think D Ware had a year and a half off. Like once I got there, a couple of injuries got him, but
Hmm.
to watch even the secondary play and the communication between the back end and the front end of the defense and how it all ties in, and they're guys that they'd built so much with each other that hey, we might not like how we talk to each other at times, but it's all for the common goal of what we're trying to get here, and that's another Super Bowl. So it's unfortunate that we just couldn't get it. I think losing Peyton Manning on the other side of the ball was a big loss to them, and it seems like now that they've finally got a quarterback situation going, their defense is back, playing great defense again. And I think that's always been a thing with Denver is if they can have, the quarterback position and, the offensive side going, their defense is always going to be pretty good.
I think anytime you lose Peyton Manning, it's not going to be great for your football team.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely tough.
so your next 3 years, and just to throw some other great minds out there, like Vance Joseph, your next three
Yeah,
years in Denver, Vic Fangio was there. He just
yeah,
won a Super Bowl with Philadelphia. Joe Woods and Brandon Staley were there as well.
yeah, yeah.
Just kind of just talk a little bit more about those guys and just learning from those guys as well, because like all of those guys are very respected, great defensive minds.
Definitely, definitely. No, I loved when Vance got there. It was like, it felt kind of like a new change. Obviously from that Super Bowl team and Kubiak and, the way he was doing things to then having Vance come in and he was like a new spark of energy and brought his own, style to the 3-4 defense. And yeah, I really loved that. I felt like I really thrived under his coaching and how it was. It was unfortunate that we just couldn't get it going as a whole team. And he got let go, and then bringing Vic Fangio was awesome, and it's interesting just different coaching styles and how different coaches approach it. Like Vic Fangio, he's a guy that night before the game you're probably watching 40 minutes of film and going through cut ups and doing that as a defense, making the calls, making the adjustments, doing things like that. Vance Joseph, it wasn't as much. It might be we're just watching maybe 20 minutes of film in the team meeting room, like after, and different approaches and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I felt like, through all those changes that we had, it was still like a great defense. And then Joe Woods coming in, being DC, running similar defense to what, Wade Phillips was running. And then Brandon Staley working with the outside backers, and just to see how their careers have also, blossomed into coaching roles. And yeah, it's awesome just always just to see him around, like, when we play other teams and always get to go up and ask them how they're doing. It's been a good journey because, they obviously remember me as the rookie and when I came in, and, now I'm a
Now you're the
10-year,
vet.
yeah, now I'm like a 10-year vet, and, it's a lot different, but, yeah, it's just awesome. It's always good just to see those guys and see them still around the league.
Awesome. Well, from August 2020 to August 2024, you were in Jacksonville, okay? And you
Yeah.
had some really good years in there. There's one thing I'm curious about, Adam, that you don't have to share if you
Yeah.
can't or if you don't want to. Was that 2021 season as absolutely insane as everybody thinks it was? I'm talking about the Urban Meyer year.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the outside and the media blow it out to be a bit worse than what it was. I thought the thing about Urban Meyer, and I think he's going to do him. He's going to do his how he coaches, all that stuff. And I think if you get the buy-in from the guys, it's a recipe for success. Like the one thing I loved about Coach Meyer was he was constantly bringing in champions, Super Bowl champions. constantly just bringing in like these guys who everyone knows and having them talk to us about what it takes to win. Everything was about winning that he was doing. Everything was competition. Everything was, driven for what we're going to be. It might not be overnight, but it's what's going to happen here. And, a part of his thing is he's going to figure out who the guys are, and you're either going to become one of the guys or you're probably going to be out of here. And then from that, building the team off that core of what you have each year, you're just going to keep adding guys, so, it might not be a one year fix, but, year 2, year 3, you're going to be competing at the top level because you've built this team of just guys that are bought into this system. And, it's just a bit unfortunate how things went. But, I think one thing that I definitely respect out of Urban Meyer's era was, he made everyone work, from the training room to front office to everyone. He changed it from it just being about the players that are losing on Sundays to now the whole organization is losing on Sundays. So, if you're not trying to get better at your job, it's not helping this team. So we can bash the players and be on the players about what's happening on Sundays, but is the nutritionist doing the best she can every day? Is the weight room doing the best they can? Is the training room doing the best they can? And if you're not trying to do the best that you can, then we'll find someone else that's going to come in and give the best. Because at the end of the day, it's a trickle down effect of every aspect of the organization leads to what products on the field. So, I respect him for taking that view and really giving the whole kind of organization of Jacksonville a shakeup. And I think we saw it in 2022 when Doug came in. You kind of saw that trickle over of how the team was built and how the team was structured and how things went. It was all set up by Urban Meyer and what he was doing previous to that. So, it was kind of a great situation for Doug to come into, because you had a hungry team that really had got treated like, a pro team at that point, not just like, oh, it's just the team losing and it's just, these 53 guys on Sunday that are not getting the job done. No, we're losing at all aspects in that building. And he had everyone on eggshells walking around, making sure they're doing their job. So, I definitely respect that about him.
Now, did it come as a bit of a shock that Urban didn't get to finish out the year? Because I thought that I was just myself personally, I was stunned that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, that might be a bit of
Yeah.
like, oh, I got to be careful with how I answer this.
I don't really know. At the end of the day, you're so focused on your job, you don't really know what's happening kind of
Sure.
behind the scenes with, the owners and general management and stuff like that. So,
Sure.
it was a bit of a shock with kind of what happened. And then, for, some of the players to come out and say stuff and what happened there. But I also dial it down to, you know, that's part of coaching in a way too, what he was doing. And I don't think there was a lot of malicious intent behind what he was doing. I just think he likes giving guys a hard time at times too. And, it might not be perceived that way when you're the guy that it's happening to. So I can see where that comes from. But I think, when it's one thing after another and then this snowball effect, all eyes are pointing on ownership to be like, well, what are you going to do?
Right.
And you can kind of get coaxed into doing something by the media and by, other things to make a move and say, well, we got to make a move now because everyone's talking about it. So yeah, I would probably say a bit of a shock from that standpoint, but it's the NFL and it's a business and they got to protect their brand. And when your brand's getting, the ratings that they were getting, it wasn't a good look for them. So I think they had to kind of, pull the plug on it and say, well, it was nice, but we're going to go in a different direction.
Because I always feel like there's like this misconception, right? Where it's like, oh, it's like these player revolts and things like that. It's like, no, man, like you just explained, it's like we're all focused on doing our jobs, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah. We're definitely all focused on the job, and if I'm worried about what's happening at Urban Meyer, I'm not worried about what's happening in the B gap. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right.
Um, so yeah, as much as there's player revolts and things like that. I think it's more guys are just listening to the media and talking about what's happening there. But I think from my standpoint, you're just focused on your job and,
Right.
hey, how can I help this team win more? How can I help us get more victories? How can I get better at my job to get a better result, and leave all that other BS to whoever has to deal with it. Because I'm not going to be the one making that decision. So all I can do is focus on playing ball and making sure that I have a job at the end of the day.
It's like that old thing. It's, hey man, that's above my pay grade.
100%. Yeah, 100%. That's ownership and what they want to do and how they feel. And you know, like I said, at the end of the day, it's like if you're worried about what they're doing, you're probably not worried about what you're doing. So
For sure.
I'm sure some guys probably might have a bit more input that might have been like the big guys on big contracts and how they felt about it all. And who knows if ownership ever talked to them and said, well, what do you think? Do you guys think we should get rid of him or keep him? And um, but I also think it's a bit tough because you get a guy who had a lot of success in college, and in college you can kind of talk to players a bit more how you want, and you got a bit more tighter grip on the leash because these guys aren't earning money like that and haven't been in the league for 10 years doing it, and then having a guy tell them what to do and how to play and this and that, where in the NFL you've got guys that are earning more money than the head coach. So it's tough to talk to some guys at sometimes. And, some guys are like, well, I've done this for 10 years and got to this point in my career. Why am I going to change? And
For sure.
so that's where I think a bit of the hardship is for college coaches making that transition is, you got to figure out how to talk to the team properly, how to talk to certain guys and get the best out of them without making them feel like, damn, I'm back in college again. And I got this coach like on my ass and, this and that. But, there are a lot of guys in the NFL that are just, they're just getting through it, and they're there because the check's nice, and they're not there because they want to be the best anymore. So, it's weeding out a lot of those guys to create a winning, team, and getting the best product you can.
Now you brought up Doug Peterson coming along in 2022 and 2023. Mike Caldwell was defensive coordinator. I want to bring him up in a little bit. You
Yep.
mentioned him earlier as well. And you did talk about it, about noticing a big difference. More so just like kind of that trickle effect from the Urban Meyer era over to Doug
Yeah.
Peterson. What were your thoughts on Peterson as a coach? Because you guys did have some success there in the 2 years, in his first two
Yeah,
years.
I think with Doug it was really good just because at that point I felt like we had a lot of veterans around the team, and I think Doug's coaching style, the way he runs the team, he relies heavy on that veteran presence to the team's going to go where those vets make it go. We can rely on young talent, but you got to have that core of vets that, you know, this is the way we do things. This is the way we practice. This is the way we meet, and there's a standard to it all. And Doug did a great job of bringing in his philosophies and letting the vets really control it, and putting us in positions to be leaders and succeed and things like that. And then I think the staff that he built was great. On the defensive side of the ball, it was great. And then even bring it what he did with Trevor and the offense on that side was also really good. And I just think his competitive nature, his the way he competes, the way he's always it's the small little details that win and lose games. It's the 2 minutes before the half, coming out of the half, and the last 4 minutes of the game. They're the key parts of the game that if you're winning those parts of the game, you're going to be you're going to be close to winning a lot of football games. A lot of shit can happen early in the game and through the game, but if you're winning those key moments where clock management and things like that all come into factors, then you can be, because how many times do you see it? The team scores right before the half, they come out, they score on the first drive, and it's a 14-point swing before the other teams even touch the ball. Or end of the game, you score, you go 3 and out, you get the extra time out with the 2 minute, you got a couple extra timeouts, you go score again, and you're back in the football game. So he really bring like that experience side of the coaching, and I think having that veteran team, and it was just a good recipe at that point. And then we followed it up the following year. I think we were 8-3 at one point, and we
Mm-hmm.
probably had more chance to be the one seed than to not make playoffs, and we ended up losing like 8 games straight. And we had I think a few injuries, and I think just a bit of a snowball effect kind of happened. And unfortunately didn't make the playoffs that year, but that would have been huge. Another great year, 2 years in a row making the playoffs for the Jags would have been awesome. And I just felt like after that, it kind of just got a bit different. Like the energy kind of changed. We got kind of away from, what we are kind of going through with Urban and, a team that had been through a lot of adversity, 3 head coaches in 3 years and, just trying to find that recipe. And we kind of got away from that edge on our shoulder, I think, in that 4th year that I was there, that we missed out on the playoffs. I just think that chip on our shoulder kind of dwindled a bit. And, you can't let that happen in the NFL. Teams are too good and you got to play with that chip constantly and play with that edge because, if you don't have it, that's another difference between winning and losing games.
For sure. Now, finally in 2024, you were with the Colts for a little bit, right?
Yep.
And then you ended up joining the Bucs later on in the season, like you said, right before that playoff game. Now, your former Broncos teammate Shaq Barrett was on the team at that
Yep.
point, and also Mike Caldwell was here as inside linebackers coach. When you were thinking about joining the Bucs, did you talk to those guys at all about kind of what everything was going on here in Tampa Bay?
Not really, not really. It was kind of at the point of the year. It was close to the end of the year. I knew Shaq was down here. I'd played with Jeremiah Ledbetter, who was here, and
Mm-hmm.
he had played with like Vita and a few of the guys on the defensive line room and stuff like that. So I'd reached out to him and just, I'd seen just the type of team Tampa was and how they're built. And, obviously Todd Bowles and that defense. It's the same defense, Mike was running when we were in Jacksonville together. So, it was a place that I could come, I could learn the defense quickly and just get back into that rhythm of playing ball. Instead of being like, damn, I got to come here and learn every single play, what it is. I felt like it was just a really good fit of, I can come in, I can, as soon as I start hearing those defensive calls again, it's like I already know what they are. So, within like the couple of days of being here, I was like, damn, like I wish I was kind of here all year because it's a defense like I feel like I'm built for that 3-4, the big end position, 3 technique, really suits my style play. So just when I got down here, I saw how the room was. I don't even think they had a rookie last year, so it was a veteran room, the D line room, and I was just like, dude, this is back to being in kind of like a football locker room, like the locker room I came into as a rookie where it's all
Wow.
vets around you and you can really just dive into playing ball and there's no extra drama and extra stuff going on the outside.
Well, first off, shout out Jeremiah Ledbetter. Okay,
Yeah, yeah, legend.
because
He's a
he
legend.
helped you get there. So
Yeah,
he
100%.
said, hey, it's a good place to be, right? Secondly,
Definitely.
that's awesome that you just
Yeah,
you just compared the Bucks current locker room, just the culture, let's say, right,
yeah,
to post Super Bowl Denver
yeah,
Broncos.
yeah,
That's quite the comparison to make. So I think that is awesome. I do want to dive into that room in a minute, that defensive line room.
yeah,
But also I do want to mention now your former Broncos teammate, now current Bucks teammate, and fellow Broncos draftee Riley Dixon is on the team.
yeah,
Have you had a
yeah.
chance to connect with Riley yet?
Yeah, I have. And yeah, it's crazy, times have changed. Like I remember when we both got there, we were both single, young, coming out of college, both drafted the same year. And now we both have kids, we've got a family, and just having those conversations about how times changed, the journeys that we're both taking. He's bounced around to a few places, I've bounced around to a few places, but to be back in the same locker room with him is awesome. And, he's going to bring a big leg and he's going to be a huge weapon for us on special teams. And yeah, he's just a great locker room guy, another veteran guy that really is going to help this football team.
Now you just mentioned how you said like, man, I wish I was here the entire year. Do you feel like obviously like you're the vet in the room basically, right? In
Yeah.
terms of the longest tenured guy, do you feel like this is kind of giving you like I don't want to use the word second wind basically for but like is this kind of rejuvenated just in terms of like scheme fit, locker room fit, culture fit, just kind of like reinvigorated those types of things in a positive
Yeah,
way?
definitely, definitely. I think, whenever you can get into a building where you feel pretty comfortable, scheme wise, and, with guys in the room, it feels good and makes you want to be there and play and do all that. And not to say that I didn't feel that in
Sure.
Indianapolis. I felt like that was a great room too. They had Grover Stewart, DeForest Buckner, like a bunch of guys that are
Yeah.
doing it at a top level. So, I felt like we were great there too. But yeah, just to be here back in this defense, and you surround yourself with guys that have had success. Vita's won a Super Bowl, Greg Gaines Super Bowl. A lot of guys that have just had that success on the field that I can still learn from. But then, yeah, come with that leadership, that veteran leadership on my side. Just it's just getting in the young guys' ears, and like I said earlier, it's about giving back to the game. I feel like I'm at a standpoint now where the game's given me so much that like I would do a disservice to it to not help these young guys out and give them the best opportunity. And when I'm talking to these guys and I'm mentoring these guys, it's sorry, I'll just put that on silent.
That's okay.
When I'm mentoring these guys, it does reinvigorate me and does make me want to be here and play and do it at a high level still because I know I can. And and it's just, yeah, it's motivating, man. It's motivating to get out there and show these young guys how to play ball at this level and how to carry yourself like a pro and how to have success. So I'm excited, man. It's gonna be an awesome year.
Now I know you mentioned Vita Vea, right? And obviously we know just how absolutely insane he is, right?
Yeah.
He's just a wrecking ball of a human being. But there are some younger guys on this defensive line as well. You mentioned last year how they didn't have a rookie, but they did have some young guys like Kalijah Cansey, Logan Hall. They brought in
Yeah.
Elijah Roberts this year. They brought in a bigger human wrecking ball of a
Yeah.
human being in
Yeah.
Desmond Watson. I know you talked about mentoring these guys. Have you had a chance to talk to these guys, and
Yeah, definitely.
what has your impression been on these guys so far? Those
Yeah,
four.
it's been awesome, man. On E-Rob and Watson, like they've both been awesome, very receptive, and it's just getting in their ears, telling them like, once I told them like I'm a 10-year vet, they're like, how have you done it? And it's just explaining to them like, hey, man, just get the playbook down. That's number one. As soon as you can get that playbook down and make it like the back of your hand, it's like now you can really see what the offense is doing. You can take in the offensive picture. You can look it down in distance. Everything will slow down for you. But if you don't know like the rules of the defense or kind of how we're doing things on the defensive side, then you're just getting the call, you're scrambling, you're just lining up instead of being like, okay, I know the call, I can get lined up. Now I can take in the information that the offense is giving me. And just like tips and tricks that I use, like I still do note cards to this day. Like when I'm getting the installs, I put them on little note cards and I'll just have them with me in my backpack. And when I'm sitting here at home, I'll go through them and you start with install one. It's about 5 note cards. Then you go through those a couple of times. And before you know it, you're like, all right, I already got them. Because if you're going through your book the whole time, like it's tough to see where you've made all these little notes and things like that. So, install two comes in. Now you've added another 5 cards. So now you've got like 10 cards and you're just going through them like while you're sitting there on the couch. You might have the basketball on or something.
Mhm.
Install 3 the next day because it comes so quick.
Right.
So it's just making sure, if you're on top of the playbook, everything else is going to slow down for you. Then you can really play ball. And, the NFL teams aren't scheming like they are in college in terms of putting in a different trick play every week and different runs and stuff like that. What you see is what you're going to get. A team's going to run what they do for 3-4 weeks, and then they're going to change up who they are, change up their identity a bit. But those teams, like they're giving you the information. It's can you process it? Can you take it in? Can you make the notes? Can you put the time in to study the game? And that's going to help give you success. But yeah, to see Kalijah and Logan and those guys, and it's like it's motivating for me because I can help Logan out, I can help Kalijah out, I can help those guys out with just the experience of playing. But they're ballers in their own right, and they're going to have a great year as well. But yeah, it's all about helping the young guys out, bringing the young guys along with us, and just creating the best team that we can and the best room that we can.
Right on. Well, Adam, I got one more question for you, sir. So
Yeah,
obviously you're a 10-year vet. You've been through it all. You've been on some of the best defenses of our generation, right?
yeah.
What should Bucks fans expect from Adam Gotsis this upcoming season?
Yeah, for me, I'm trying to have my career year. I'm trying to have the best year that I can. I'm trying to be a veteran presence in that room. I'm trying to be a guy that can be on the field, making impact plays. Career stat line, and then helping out on special teams. The last few years, I've played a lot of special teams and helped out there too. So, just being a utility guy that can play all three positions across the defensive front, dependable, reliable, high effort, impact player, and yeah, help this Bucs defense be one of the top defenses in the league.
Love it, man. Well, guys, thank you so much for watching this interview. It is greatly appreciated. Adam, thank you for taking so much of your time and sitting down with
Thank
me.
you.
It's greatly,
I
greatly
appreciate it. Yeah, thank
appreciated.
you. We'll have to do it again.
Yes,
Thank you.
where can the people find you?
Yeah, so just on Twitter, I think it's Gotsis96, and Instagram's just Adam Gotsis. So yeah, follow me on there. I don't post too much content, but if you want to follow me, it's just me, my kids, a bit of football stuff on there too. But yeah, follow along, and I'll try to share as much as I can through our success this year.
Love it, man. Well, guys, thank you so much for watching
Yeah.
this video. Hope you all enjoyed. As always, guys, we will see you all in the next video or the next live stream. But until then, and as always, guys, goodbye for now, and go Bucs.